Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports, and today we are using a tier maker to discuss all 30 NBA franchises and exactly what I expect from these teams going into the 2023-2024 season. Really excited for this video. If you do enjoy, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more future NBA content. Super excited to be getting back into the swing of things here, so let's jump over to it now. And here are our categories or our tiers. We've got the conference winners, so there's going to be 2 teams in this tier. Then we have other title contenders, which might be a little bit more fleshed out. Top 6 playoff teams, so teams that I think will be in the top 6 in their respective conferences. We're also going to look at some play-in caliber teams that I think are a little underrated, that maybe people are sleeping on a little bit. We'll also end with young and frisky, and then the bottom of the conference. We're actually going to do bottom of the conference here pretty quickly on, because I think those are the most interesting teams to talk about actually, or some of the most interesting teams to talk about, and that is Washington for the Eastern Conference and Portland for the Western Conference. Let's go ahead and start with Washington, who I really love everything that they have done this offseason. The Washington Wizards, they had a really tricky situation. Tommy Shepard, their longtime president decision maker for the Washington Wizards, kind of led them down a pretty treacherous path, honestly, with some of the decisions. There wasn't really good long-term planning, and because of that, I think that we found them in a kind of tricky spot when it came to if they were ever going to be a real team that could be more than mediocre. And I think the answer to that was no. Michael Winger comes in after Tommy Shepard was fired, and he's really fire-sailed the whole team. Bradley Beal got traded for, I think, pretty incredible value given the fact that he had a no-trade clause, getting a bunch of second-round picks, getting a vast collection of pick swaps from Phoenix, which I think has some pretty high upside down the road. You're also able to reroute Porzingis in a deal that gets you Tyus Jones. You also got a pick on draft night. The Wizards have set themselves up pretty well, given the situation. They were in a spot where really they didn't have a lot going for them. Now they have at least Jordan Poole, Kyle Kuzma they got back on a pretty friendly number. Those two guys will put up numbers. It's not going to translate to a lot of winning, but I do like what they did on draft night as well, ensuring themselves Bilal Coulibaly, being aggressive to make sure that they got the guy that they had toward the top of their board. Now, I didn't necessarily have myself in alignment with that, but who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the Wizards saw something that I didn't see on film that they really liked, and at least they're sticking to their guns here. Michael Winger's been very aggressive, and for the most part in his tenure as a decision maker, he's done a very good job, so I don't want to doubt him. And I think the Wizards, they're not going to win a lot right now, but I think they've set themselves up for a better long-term future than they had coming into this offseason. And then the Portland Trailblazers, another team that, if you had watched any of my previous videos, especially the worst futures in the league videos, I talked about Portland quite a bit in those videos, where I thought, look, if they trade pick 3 and they go and try and win around Damian Lillard, it's going to end up being very, very, very bad for them. And the complete opposite has happened. They're now in a spot where they're going to likely trade Damian Lillard, probably to the Miami Heat, but other teams could still be in play, possibly. And they drafted at pick 3, and not only did they drafted a guy who would be #1 overall in a lot of other drafts in Scoot Henderson. They're not going to win right now. They're really, really young. But I like their beginning pieces of their core. Shaedon Sharpe's going to be an absolute baller in the NBA. I think Scoot Henderson is going to be a multi-time All-NBA guard and probably a future Hall of Famer. The Portland Trailblazers are set up long-term for some real serious success. They haven't, seen that in quite some time, and honestly, they're not going to see it this year, but they're trending in the right direction. Now looking at the polar opposite, who are the 2 teams I expect to win the conference? And respectively, looking at the West, the Denver Nuggets, yes, I know they lost Bruce Brown. They also lost Jeff Green, but the main group, the starting 5, is intact there. And you also have young guys who I think can take steps forward in Christian Brown, Peyton Watson. We'll see what they get out of some of the other guys that they drafted this year too. I did like their draft holistically. I think that Calvin Booth's done a great job. I think Tim Connolly did a great job kind of building that team from the start, but Calvin Booth made some nice adjustments on the margins that have helped take this team from where they were to where they currently are, which is reigning NBA champions. And I think if you look at the Western Conference, the Nuggets are still a tier above some of those other teams. The playoffs were really great for them. I think that there are some teams that they maybe be a little vulnerable to, that maybe they could extend series if they're healthy, 6, maybe 7 games. But at the end of the day, if you had me put down money on who I think is going to come out of the West, the Denver Nuggets are my answer. And then for the East, I'm going with the Boston Celtics, which this is probably one of the most interesting teams, not only in the Eastern Conference, but in the entire league. Probably one of the most fascinating situations. You think about Boston, and typically the last 4, 5, 6 years, it's been a team that's very switchable. They've got good defenders all over that are mobile, can guard out in space, and that was a real benefit to them. When Ime Udoka came in, they kind of fell away from that a little bit with more Robert Williams, and of course Ime Udoka really maximized Robert Williams. That was the year Marcus Smart won Defensive Player of the Year. That team was very well set up with the way that they defended, and it featured more drop coverage. And then this past year with Joe Mazzulla, they went even more drop coverage than they ever have with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown on the roster, which I think is a very important note, because the trade for Kristaps Porzingis, I know a lot of people felt a certain way about it. This team is transitioning to drop coverage, and Kristaps Porzingis statistically last year was one of the best drop coverage defenders, and now for the first time in his career, he's going to be playing with a collection of good perimeter defensive talent around him. Think about the Derek Whites, the Jason Tatums, Jaylen Browns of the world. The Celtics are really good when it comes to perimeter defensive capabilities, keeping guys in front of them, using their chest and their bodies to ride hips and just make shots tough around the rim. And now you also factor in the fact that the Celtics have not one but two really good rim protectors in Robert Williams and Kristaps Porzingis. Porzingis also offensively really fits what the Celtics wanted to do with Joe Mazzulla, which is shoot more threes than the other team. They got not only a good three-point shooter, they got an absolute sniper. Kristaps Porzingis is one of those big men in today's league that he's not just shooting open threes, he's shooting contested threes. And that's a real benefit to the Celtics, because you can't step off of that guy from behind the three-point line. He's a very good shooter. His career splits, for the most part, have been relatively good. I know people like to poke at them a little bit when it's in the mid-30s, but he's been a very reliable three-point shooter and a guy that he shoots tough ones, and because of that, it gives the Celtics a little bit more offensive functionality. He can also go out of the post a bit, not expecting him to do that a ton, but at the end of the day, the Celtics made the right decision, keeping the Jays together long-term. It's going to bode very well for them. We've seen time and time again in NBA history where two young guys get separated, even though they were kind of starting to tear up the league in their mid-20s. The Celtics are not making that mistake. They're keeping them together. They're saying, we're going to tie these two together for the rest of their prime. We're going to continue to build around them with guys like Porzingis, Derek White. They still have Malcolm Brogdon. Of course, they did have to let Grant Williams go, but I still think the Celtics, they're trending in the right direction. They're getting players that fit the system that they want to run, and I think they're going to be a really tough team. And because of that, if you ask me right now to pick the finals next year, it would be Nuggets versus Celtics in what I think would be a very interesting series where the Nuggets would probably be favored, but the Celtics would present a challenge that the Nuggets haven't faced yet, which is two real elite wings with a dominant shooting big man attached to that. So we'll see what ends up happening in that series if we ever get it, but that would be my pick right now. And I think the best place to go currently after this is back down to the young and frisky category. Some of the teams that I think are pretty solid. Charlotte Hornets with Brandon Miller, LaMelo Ball, that's a really good beginning duo. Miles Bridges is back as well. You could also argue that they should be in the underrated squads, because if you look at their Vegas over-under, they're probably one of the safer bets. So in fact, maybe I'll move Charlotte up to that underrated squad. Also for the young and frisky category, we're looking at some other teams in here that I think could be really, really good young and frisky rosters. One of those is Orlando. I think a really young and frisky roster with Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner. I really love the addition of Anthony Black. I think Jett Howard's going to fit in Orlando better than most people are talking about right now. Anthony Black's very cerebral, though, so he's really the player that stands out to me from the draft. I was super high on him. Did not think it was a reach at all for Orlando to take him at 6. They also brought in Joe Ingles to help their shooting a little bit. I think Orlando had a pretty calculated offseason. I'd also put Utah in this young and frisky category. Getting John Collins definitely moves them up the totem pole just a little bit, although the Western Conference is no joke this year. There's a lot of talent around the league. In Utah, I think the one question is, what does the playmaking look like from their guard spot? Jordan Clarkson, of course, stepped into the starting role last year, played very, very well. Colin Sexton off the bench was pretty reliable too. I don't know if there's enough playmaking here to make the Utah Jazz a true playoff team, but if Lauri Markkanen plays the way that he did last year, maybe even takes a step forward, it's hard to bet against them. But just in how tough the Western Conference is, I don't really see them as a play-in or playoff team at this point, although they're very, very good. Detroit, another team that's going to be really young and frisky, and I think with Monty Williams, we're going to see a big step forward for the Detroit Pistons in a way that people aren't quite expecting. I think Jaden Ivey's going to be a huge benefactor of Monty Williams and his structure that he's going to provide. I also think if you look at some of the other pieces on the roster, Jalen Duren, I think Monty Williams is one of the better coaches in the league to coach a guy like Jalen Duren and a guy like Jaden Ivey. And then the return of Cade Cunningham is really going to be the main storyline here for Detroit. I also like Ausar Thompson for them. I think, you know, with his skill set, perhaps I was a little low on him even during the draft. With, you know, I went back and watched more of his Overtime Elite film, and for some reason I feel like maybe I was sleeping a little bit on some of the stuff that he does. Now, I still feel pretty good about my overall rankings. I'm not kind of going back and rewriting history here, but I do think that if there's a guy that trends upward past kind of where I had him, Ausar Thompson might be the guy from this past draft, and I'm hoping for it. I'm hoping for Detroit's sake that he ends up becoming a multi-time All-Star level player, which I didn't necessarily foresee, but he's got the talent for sure to at least make some noise. Going on to another young and frisky team, that's going to be the San Antonio Spurs, and I really think that Victor Wembanyama is going to have an elite rookie season. I'm talking 23-ish, 25-ish points per game as a rookie. He's going to be nice this year for San Antonio. Devin Vassell is going to take a huge step forward, I think, as well. Keldon Johnson, his defensive versatility, his screen navigation defensively paired with Victor Wembanyama in drop coverage, I think is going to be a terrifying sight for opposing offenses. I think the Spurs defensively are going to take a huge step forward. Trey Jones is going to be a godsend for Victor Wembanyama too. And I think really the big things to watch for San Antonio this year are, what do the lineups look like? Do the Spurs try and play Victor mostly at the 4? Do they play him at the 5 a bunch? And really, what do they try and put around him in terms of style? And then in addition to that, how often does Victor roll to the rim? If Victor can learn that as a roller, he has probably one of the best touches in the league already as a big man, he needs to roll hard every single time, because if he catches the ball inside the nail, he's going to be a really tough cover with his size and his skill. So I think those are going to be some of the important things to watch. Now, I think for him, he wants to play in isolation a bunch. He wants to be a ball handler, and those things are doable. You can have him do that, but he needs to also play kind of as a traditional big man every once in a while to really maximize his talent. Another young and frisky team here that I think we could throw in there. There's a few that I actually do like a bit in this category. Another young and frisky team, and we'll see what happens with them, but it's the Indiana Pacers. I almost want to put them in the underrated squads category as well. Now, this is a different type of underrated. Charlotte's underrated because everyone thinks they're like absolutely terrible, and they're going to be better than terrible. Indiana, people expect Indiana to be decent. I think they're going to be a little bit more than decent. In fact, I would almost slide them up into that playing caliber. They're kind of like right in between these two tiers for me. Underrated squad, I think, is fair. I think that they're a good team. I think they're going to be one of the best transition offenses in the league with Halliburton, Obi Toppin, Buddy Hield, who's a great outlet into transition, gets a lot of early threes off. Very, very good there. Benedict Matherin's a blur going downhill. I think Jarris Walker is going to get them into more transition opportunities with his defensive capabilities. We'll see if the offense comes along as well. But ultimately, I really do like Indiana. I think Indiana is a team that has 14 good players, which is really rare to see in today's NBA. The Pacers are a team that could really be set for a consolidation trade. Now, I'm not talking about a Benedict Mathurin for OG Anunoby type deal, which I've seen floated on Twitter, which I don't understand. For them, it's about, hey, can we go get a big star, like one of the premier players in the league at some point? It's not going to be this year, but you know, if there's a team to watch for Joel Embiid that no one really has on their radar right now, Indiana might be the destination, which is pretty crazy to say, but I think Halliburton plus Mathurin plus Embiid plus Jarris Walker is a really, really good grouping to probably make some noise in the Eastern Conference. So we'll see, but I do like the Pacers where they're at currently, and I do like where they're going quite a bit. Let's go over now to some of the other title contenders, and for me, I think the best place to start is the Eastern Conference with a couple of teams that I think are still in that ballpark. The Milwaukee Bucks, and a little bit less so the Philadelphia 76ers. For the Sixers, I'm a little bit more here in the middle, and for the Bucks, I'm a little bit more right here, where they're a little bit closer to being a potential conference winner, and the Sixers a little bit closer to being maybe not a true title contender. But I still do believe in these two teams. I think the Bucks, when they're healthy, they're really, really good. And if Brook Lopez and Chris Middleton, if they can play the way that we've seen them play in the past, Brook Lopez most recently this past year, where I think he should have been the Defensive Player of the Year, and then Chris Middleton with his skill set that we've seen, you know, 2, 3, 4 years ago, if he can kind of regain that form, the Bucks are going to be dangerous. The Sixers, I feel a little bit less confident in, but I do like some of their additions. I think Patrick Beverley was a really nice signing for them. I think really an underrated one. Of course, people, you know, everyone talks about Pat Bev, but I do think there's a lot of beneficial things he does, especially on the defensive end, where the Sixers have a really interesting defensive trio across PJ Tucker, DeAnthony Melton, and Patrick Beverley. And that, of course, doesn't even mention arguably their best defender in Joel Embiid, who is an elite all-world rim protector. So we'll see what happens here with Philadelphia, but I think they're a team that if stuff clicks for them, they could definitely be a team we talk about as a potential finals team come next April. Now when we get into some of these other Western Conference teams that I could see legitimately pushing for the title. One team here, the Golden State Warriors, very interesting for them. The fact that they made the move for Chris Paul, traded Jordan Poole away with a first and a second round pick to go get 39-year-old Chris Paul. That's a pretty big commitment to a small guard who, quite frankly, has never really been healthy throughout the playoffs, at least not regularly. And then you also look at the fact that he's just up there in age, and he's small, and he's trending downward in his career. But I do think that this is a very interesting pairing. Someone who's as smart and cerebral of a player as Chris Paul is, you put him now with a team that loves to get into early transition. They do it just about as well as anybody. They're one of the fastest teams still, despite the aging roster a bit. And I think people are going to disagree with this. I think Chris Paul and Steph Curry are very playable together. Now, you're going to have some defensive limitations. That's where if Klay Thompson can take another half step forward, recovering from his injuries on the defensive end, and if Draymond Green stays at the level he's been playing at defensively, you're going to rely on those guys. You're going to also rely on Andrew Wiggins probably as the main point of attack defender pretty frequently, which, it does provide some issues, but I think offensively they're going to be really special. You're going to have Chris Paul running a high pick and roll while Steph Curry's running off of basically like a floppy or stagger action on the backside. There's going to be a lot of movement, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see Chris Paul, who's been rather ball dominant, now playing in a system that is rather built on off-ball movement and getting off the ball and then moving off of it. And I don't think they're going to ask Chris Paul to change his game too much. I just think the rest of the offense is going to function around him very interestingly in an intriguing fashion that I think is going to fascinate me watching this team play. And I think the Warriors are a team that they got better moving off of Jordan Poole. Even just pulling Jordan Poole out of their rotation would have made them better. And now not only that, but they got a player who, if he's coming off the bench, is probably the best backup point guard in the league. And if he's starting, I still think it's a feasible way to win. For the Warriors, there's going to be some issues, there's going to be some problems, but I think this team is still in that ballpark. And you look at another team in this ballpark as well, the Lakers. I kind of go between these two areas for them. They did a very good job getting out of the mess, which was, hey, we have three good players and they don't even fit together, and we have no depth. Buying Rui Hachimura for 3 second-rounders aged well for them. Getting D'Angelo Russell and Malik Beasley, Jared Vanderbilt, it's a little bit overrated. I think, really the big thing for them is the arrival of Austin Reeves, who I think is going to have an even bigger role this year. And I think Austin Reeves is the player that, even with LeBron and Anthony Davis there, those are the two guys that set your floor as a playoff team. Austin Reeves is the guy that's going to potentially elevate this team into a potential title contender, because you look at his ball handling, you see his ability to handle in a pick and roll, you see his ability to be a connector. Those are all very vital things for this Lakers team, and I think he's really one of the key pieces to see on this roster doing those things for the Lakers this next year, which I think is really important. Then we go into another underrated squad, so let's go back down to this tier, and I think it's the Houston Rockets, who, for me, the Rockets, they're probably not going to be a play-in team, but I think that people are really sleeping on how much better this team got. It kind of reminds me, and this isn't going to be a great comparison, it's really not, but to the Bulls when they signed DeMar DeRozan, Lonzo Ball, they, of course, made the Vucevic trade. The Rockets, they kind of remind me of that, because they went into an offseason where the team was looking to get better, and they did. Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, two massive additions, as well as a really good head coach hire in Ime Udoka. The one thing about the Rockets defensively over the last 3 years is they couldn't guard anybody. If there was a parked car sitting on the three-point line, somehow, some way, it probably would have resulted in a blow-by, layup at the rim with no help side defense. Those things are not going to happen with Ime Udoka. They're not going to happen with Fred VanVleet on the floor. They're not going to happen with Dylan Brooks on the floor. And that's really the biggest culture change that we needed for the Houston Rockets. Then in addition to that, you look at Fred VanVleet probably organizing this team a little bit more. Now, one detractor that I don't think people have talked about enough, Fred VanVleet loves really early shot clock attempts, especially from 30-plus feet. He shot 15% on three-pointers this year from above 30 feet. And no, I'm not talking about all heaves. I'm talking about legitimate three-point shots. So there's some flaws here. The Rockets are not a perfect team, but they got better. And I do believe a lot in Amen Thompson. I think Jalen Green's going to have a breakout year. I think Jabari Smith's going to have a breakout year. I think Tari Easton's one of the better offensive rebounding forwards in the league. And I think this Rockets team has a lot of players who are good NBA players. And because of that, they're just naturally going to be better than what people are currently expecting. Now, there's still some issues. They don't shoot the ball very well, and that's going to be a problem. I think one interesting thing will be seeing Jock Landale there in Houston, and if he actually steals minutes from Alperen Şengün when it comes to, is Şengün a 35-minute-a-game player? Is he a 30-minute per game player? Or is he kind of like 24 minutes per game where he's split in the center position pretty evenly with Landale? Because looking at Udoka's track record, rim protection is really at the forefront of his defensive structure. So because of that, is Şengün really the long-term center? I think talent-wise, you would expect him to be. He should be. I'm a big Şengün believer. I think the question is, does Houston internally believe that? Does Ime Udoka live with some of the defensive deficiencies, which I don't even think are that bad, but they're not as good as a guy like Landale, who's a little bit better as a rim protector. Of course, a little bit bigger, lengthier, although Şengün did grow a little bit this offseason. So it'll be an interesting thing to monitor for sure. Now we look at some of the other teams that I think are top 6 playoff caliber teams. The Cavaliers are in this category, although I think one more year of losing in the first round, we're probably going to see Donovan Mitchell get traded next offseason. That's just kind of the reality that we're living in. You also look at the New York Knicks in here. And one team I have to throw into the title contenders as well is the Miami Heat, which this is our 6 Eastern Conference teams here. Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, Miami, Cleveland, and New York. That's our top 6 in the Eastern Conference. It's a really good top 6. The Miami Heat, if they get Damian Lillard, you could argue they belong in here. But as of right now, we don't know if that trade's ever going to come to fruition. We don't know if Portland's going to play hardball all season long, which is a real possibility. I wouldn't even blame them for doing so. They really don't lose out on anything if they just don't have Damian Lillard play for them this year. There's really nothing to be lost if you're patient as Portland. So I think Portland needs to continue their patience, but I think if Miami finds a way to get the deal done, they're definitely in that category. Then looking at the Western Conference teams. So right now we only have 3 Western Conference teams in the top 6. So now it's about finding other teams that can be in that top 6 playoff category. The Clippers, for me, are one of them for sure. The Memphis Grizzlies win a lot of regular season games. They will be in that category as well. So there is 5. And then we're also going to throw in the Minnesota Timberwolves, which I think should be a lock. I feel really good about this top 6. And if, in fact, if there was one I would bump down, it would be maybe the Clippers for the Oklahoma City Thunder. I'm not sure about that, though. So this is the route I'm going to go with the Clippers making the top 6 because of the remarks from Ty Lue in a recent podcast where he said that they're going to try and be a little bit more aggressive of playing their stars during the regular season, which I think if they do that goes a long way in them being a better regular season team, of course. And I'm looking at this now and I realize I don't have the Sacramento Kings, which this is a problem because I think the Sacramento Kings are a top 6 team in the West. So there's going to be some team in here that falls out. I don't know what team that is. You could maybe argue Memphis because of Ja. I think Memphis is still going to win a bunch of games. I think Marcus Smart was a really good addition for them. I think the Timberwolves are way better than people expect. And because of that, I'm going to actually move the Clippers down to the play-in. The Kings, I don't expect them to be a top 3 seed again like they were last year. They were the healthiest team in the league. They were also the most clutch team in the league. Those 2 things year in, year out tend to waver and fold a little bit, so you can't really rely on those 2 things. But the Kings are fast. They're good. De'Aaron Fox took a huge step forward in his career last year. Sabonis and Herter have a really good 2-man game. Keegan Murray likely takes a step forward, which is what I kind of expect them to be cemented as a top 6 playoff team still in the Western Conference. So we have 2 play-in teams already of the 4 for the Western Conference. I think another one will be the Dallas Mavericks. They're in that tier. And then I have the Phoenix Suns. And this is going to be crazy. This kind of shows how hard the Western Conference is right now. Because all 4 of these teams are really good. This is in no order. You know, you could have the Suns here as the 7. You could have the Mavs here, whatever. I think the Thunder will be better than the Mavericks this year, probably. But the Suns, for me, you know, people are going to probably click off the video and be like, oh my God, this guy thinks the Suns are a play-in team. The Suns could still win in the first round. They could make it to the conference finals potentially out of the play-in. The issue is, though, you have 3 stars and really not a lot of depth. Now, I think they did a good job filling out their depth. They got a lot of nice role players, but again, those are role players. You don't have guys who can step up big time in the absence of some of your stars. And if you look at the games played, Durant consistently misses a ton of games, Booker misses a ton of games, and recently Beal has missed a ton of games as well. If there's a stretch where 2 of those 3 guys are out, you're looking at one of them playing 40 minutes a night, and then how do you fill in those other 8 minutes? Who's your ball handler? Are you relying on Jordan Goodwin to consistently create offense for you? And it's not that Jordan Goodwin's not a good player. I think Jordan Goodwin does a lot of nice stuff, but when the stars don't play, it's going to hurt the team significantly. And I think that's going to happen more often than a lot of other people are expecting right now, which is why I see them a little bit lower than a lot of other people. Now, they probably have more playoff equity than a team like Memphis or Sacramento or Minnesota. But again, this is kind of a regular season tier of where do I expect these teams to finish. Atlanta for me, another playing team. This is another team who I do believe has top 6 playoff talent. It's just the West right now, the East right now too. The West and East, we're in a really great spot in the league. We really badly need expansion, at least 2 teams. Honestly, I think the NBA could harbor 4-team expansion right now as well if they wanted to go that direction. They probably will not, but I think that's how much talent we have in the league right now. The Hawks are loaded. They're a really, really good team. The Brooklyn Nets are another play-in team here in the Eastern Conference, and just looking at this, I actually feel pretty good about Indiana. I'm going to move Indiana up to the play-in, and I'm going to put Toronto in the back end of the play-in as well. So there's our 4 Eastern Conference play-in teams. I actually feel pretty good about this. You could even maybe see the Pacers here. Pacers probably top 8, top 9 seed for sure in the Eastern Conference. The Pelicans, another underrated squad. I don't have a really good spot of ranking them. I think the Thunder are underrated too, by the way. I think the Thunder could be really, really dangerous team, which again, the West is loaded. If Zion Williamson plays 60 games, the Pelicans might be a 1 seed. I don't even disbelieve what I just said. I don't know where to put him, because if Ingram plays 45 games and if Zion plays 28 games, which is what he's averaged so far through 4 years in the league, the Pelicans are probably going to be a so-so team. If their 2 stars play all the time, this team's going to be unreal. I think that's really the big question. And then, of course, the worst team in the league to talk about, the Chicago Bulls. They're going to be right at the bottom of the conference, in my opinion, as well, with Washington. Washington's probably the 15 seed. The Bulls, I don't know. It's hard for me to believe that the Bulls are better than the Magic. It's hard for me to believe that the Bulls are better. Maybe they're better than the Pistons, but I don't even feel great about that. The Bulls are they're the Bulls. I just don't feel good about this team. So this is my kind of tiers right now to kind of recap. First of all, this is for the regular season and somewhat of the playoffs. Like Denver, Boston, I think those are playoff winners, right? But this is more so kind of like, hey, where are the teams at right now? There's a lot that can change from today going into the season, of course. Damian Lillard, James Harden, 2 prime examples of things that can change. But then you also look at the trade deadline. Who knows what stars are available at the trade deadline? Who knows what role players get moved where? That completely reshaped the organizations. I think a prime example of that last year was Josh Hart to New York. The Knicks took a huge step forward getting him and kind of consolidating their playoff rotation a bit. So a lot of stuff can change, but I feel pretty confident with this. I've done a lot of thinking, a lot of work has gone into this, so hopefully you guys did enjoy it. Let me know down below what you think I got wrong. Let me know what you think I got right. I'd love to hear your guys' feedback. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.